He got second place in 2018 DX tournament, so one of the best Extempers ever to do it. And he's going to be giving a quick lecture on foreign policy and especially the American role in the world in the past and kind of in the present as well. So whenever you're ready, Tanner, you can get started.
All right. Actually on a bike ride right now, lol. I'm about to be home soon, so you can see my pretty face. But I think I'll start this with a little bit of math. So whenever we're thinking about foreign policy, most of the time we're discussing questions of risk. Like, when I do this, is it more risky than that? What are all the potential outcomes? What are the risk factors of X, Y, Z, placing this ship here, building this thing, making this trade deal, etc. And so we can actually figure out what risk is pretty easily. Risk equals magnitude times probability. So magnitude meaning, like if any of you guys are debaters, what is the size or effect of the impact? And probability meaning, what is the likelihood that that impact actually manifests? So, for instance, if we think about coronavirus and what is the risk of getting coronavirus or seeing like the worst outcomes happen. Well, actually for our demographic, which is young people, and even generally across the society, the probability is super, super low. But the magnitude is really high. The magnitude meaning that a set of people in our society that get the coronavirus have high risk factors, and it can be fatal or like extremely damaging in the long term to someone's lungs and heart. So that's one way to understand risk. But now we can think about the geopolitical consequence as well, right? So let's say the United States is considering deploying some kind of anti-missile system in, let's say, South Korea. Well, the probability that doing that triggers some kind of war with North Korea is super, super low. But the magnitude of a conflict with North Korea would be so high. They're a nuclear power. And so when we consider the risk of a move like that, it's higher than you might think. And that's true with a lot of things. So if you can think about these two things, whenever you're discussing or considering different approaches to American foreign policy, different decision-making matrices, these are the two things you want to keep in mind. Magnitude and probability. And collectively, those two things constitute risk. So the US today, for those of you who saw the lecture last week, is unquestionably the hegemon. We're ahead in the military dimension by leaps and bounds over every country. The only country that's even close is Russia, and they're not close at all. Economically, China is our really only competitor, and our two economies are so decisively interconnected at this point that our hegemony there is pretty strong as well. And then the third piece we meant to talk about last week was cultural hegemony, where truly the United States does not have any legitimate rivals. So we're in this global order right now where US hegemony is the status quo, and we're constantly thinking about risk. What's going to happen if we do this or that? What will be the potential implications? And what probabilities do we assign to each of those potential outcomes? And that's kind of the way that we think about security threats. So there are a number of things that we might deem security threats to the United States. So, I mean, anyone who wants to can just chime in with what they think is a risk to the United States, i.e. a legitimate security threat, and then just briefly explain to me, justify why you chose that. So it could be a foreign power, it could be a brewing conflict, it could be really anything.
As of right now, TikTok.
What's that?
Unironically. As of right now, TikTok, and unironically, because China is using it to spy on millions of Americans, track their location history and other things. It's a major national security threat.
All right, so let's think about that more precisely. TikTok is a major national security threat. China is collecting a lot of data on US consumers. So we need to think about that, right? Number one, what kind of data are they collecting? Number two, what can they use that data for? And then nest each of those under a probability question of what are the probabilities that these are used for X, Y, and Z. So using that language of risk, give me the case for why TikTok is a national security threat to the United States.
TikTok poses a significant risk to the United States of America, a significant national security risk to the United States of America, because it allows China to infiltrate American consumers' location history, as well as other mediums that could help them prepare for an attack against the United States.
Okay, but so yeah, you're right. These are all potentialities, but let's think about magnitude and probability. What is the magnitude of the data? Because TikTok is not taking trade secrets from the US. It's not taking military technology from the US. It's taking US consumer data, which don't get me wrong. Sorry, that's super loud. I actually agree with you that TikTok is a risk, but let's think about it discretely in terms of magnitude and probability. Using those terms, explain to me why TikTok is a risk to the United States.
The magnitude is the damage it could do to the American economy, and the damage it could do to cybersecurity.
Okay, so those are questions of probability, right? It could do this or that. Let's actually think about what is the magnitude. So conceivably, what does the data collection China have on TikTok mean for the US economy? Would it cause a recession? Would it cause a trade war? What is the magnitude?
It could cause a cyber attack on the United States. Ultimately.
Okay, how would that happen? They use TikTok data to launch a cyber attack on the US. Walk me through that.
They have access to American consumer habits and location history, as well as access to American behavioral traits. As a result, they could conceivably mount using TikTok an attack on American phones, would render millions of Americans completely unable to do anything for hours at a time, and then launch a cyber attack or a physical attack in another way.
I actually disagree with that. I would believe that if they are collecting data, it would be a medium probability, but the magnitude would be relatively low because it would mostly just be used to increase sales of consumer services and products. I don't think it would be used for anything on the cybersecurity level.
Yeah, I think that's pretty decent analysis. So let's think about this question, right? Magnitude can mean a lot of different things. I don't think that TikTok could be used to incapacitate American cell phones. Maybe that function exists, but that seems close to impossible for China. So that's a probability question. There's a 100% probability that they're collecting our data, that is happening right now. And so I think probably it's a fairly low magnitude event with a pretty high probability. But then you can think about other dimensions of it. So there is a high magnitude event, which would be somehow they weaponize this consumer data to really do a hit against the US economy, right? If they have more consumer data than our companies have, Chinese companies could supplant major US companies. So that's super high magnitude, but pretty low probability insofar as our own companies are collecting even more robust data than TikTok is. All right, who else has one? But TikTok, that's a good one. That's a really interesting one, and it's been in the news quite a lot. Anyone can jump in.
Maybe China's ability to hit a US air base in Japan, or a base in Japan.
All right, so talk to me about that in terms of probability and magnitude.
So I know China has the missile capabilities to hit a base in Japan now, or US bases in Japan. So that's I guess that's probable. I don't know if they would be willing to do that, but the magnitude would just like, because they're like so concentrated, the US bases in like one area of Japan, they could wipe out a lot of expensive equipment, pretty much.
Yeah, you're right. So that's a really high magnitude event. It's like they have a military capability that could really harm a US ally where a lot of US troops are stationed. That's like a very high magnitude event. But I think you're right that the probability is close to zero. So let's kind of unpack probability a little more. I can't remember if I mentioned this last week or not, but they say for an actor to take any action, there's 3 things that need to happen. And this is like a really good format you can use for any extemp speech whenever you're considering a question of will. These can be your 3 points. So an actor needs, number 1, a motivation. Number 2, a capability or a capacity. And number 3, an opportunity. And with the confluence of those 3 things, action happens every time. But absent motivation, absent opportunity, absent capability, or any combination of those, action does not occur. So let's think about China and like the potential to do some kind of strike on Japan or something like that. It's like, do they have the capability? Yes, like that's what you were describing. Do they have the opportunity to do so? It's like probably they always have an opportunity to do so. There isn't like a justification at the moment, but like they could probably come up with some kind of justification. It wouldn't be that good. So like capabilities there 100%, opportunity is kind of weak, and motivation is pretty much non-existent because their motivations move in the opposite direction. They want a strong trade relationship with the United States and Japan as well. So then that's sort of how we unpack probability. All right, who else has got a threat?
A potential threat could be bioweapons in the future.
All right, tell me about it.
So I would say that the magnitude is catastrophic because it would imply perhaps another genetically and lab engineered disease such as COVID, but the probability is low to medium because there's very low evidence that China actually created this disease in a lab. Although it was sketchy in the beginning of the pandemic, it has low evidence supporting that.
Yeah, so that's pretty good analysis. But typically when we're thinking about this, we want to think about the future, right? So a question of probability, we don't really look backwards for that. We're trying to assess what's the likelihood that something happens in the future. So let's think about bioweapons, right? Like, where are the bioweapons? Who might have them? Magnitude, you're right, is super, super high. Like COVID demonstrates that. But yeah, you're right. Probability is low because it's like, who has like, there's a few different actors with bioweapons. None of them have that confluence of opportunity, motivation, and capability. Many of their capabilities are actually pretty bad too. So that's sort of how we understand probability. But these are all pretty good. All right, I'm going to throw some at you and then someone can just chime in with the analysis. Climate change. A lot of people have been saying climate change is a security threat to the United States. And then anyone can just jump in and explain to me the case for or against that position.
While climate change is important for the USA to consider, I would say it shouldn't be regarded as a security threat because hurricanes and other natural occurrences happen on the yearly basis, and this should be regarded as like national defense, but that's something that has been going, and yeah.
All right. Yeah, so that's interesting. You pointed out hurricanes. So that's really what you want to do when you're talking about climate change is it's easy to talk about it vaguely, but you want to point to concrete things that could happen. So the really strong argument for why it might be a security threat to the United States is that climate change is an impact magnifier. So conflicts and instabilities that exist already in the world become all the worse with climate change. So look at conflict between Pakistan and India, right? In the Kashmir. This is an area that is like rapidly desertifying due to climate change, and there will like soon be water shortages. So an already tense racial situation, and then there soon isn't enough water to go around. That can create a global security risk. Like we're seeing the same thing happen between Ethiopia and Egypt, droughts in South Africa, etc., things like this. There's a really, really interesting argument that you all should read about. Basically, this guy makes the case that the Syrian civil war is the result of climate change. That what happened in the past was that Syria is very like ethnically divided, but was geographically divided as well. And then when the farming stopped being as effective due to climate change, a lot of rural folks of ethnic minority groups moved into the urban areas, and that was what laid the groundwork for the conflict in Syria's major cities that ultimately sparked the attempted iteration of the Arab Spring, but ultimately a super bloody civil war. And like there's a whole bunch of people who make arguments like this throughout history. Somebody makes this argument about the fall of the Roman Empire, that it was a change in weather patterns that led to like bad harvests, led to people on the outskirts of the empire looking to barbarian groups to provide them with crops, as opposed to the empire, which ultimately led to its downfall, this sort of thing. So you really want to isolate specific link chains. So this causes this, and you don't want to be making jumps. So on the TikTok example, for instance, and I don't mean to like keep picking on you, but I just think like this is a good example and a good learning opportunity. To get from China created TikTok to like incapacitating US phones is like a fairly big jump. So you'll want to walk your judge through specifically step by step how that's happening. And that's the same with everything else. All right. Anyone else have any thoughts about climate change vis-a-vis risk? All right. I guess not. How about China?
Well, like, I mean, China can be a risk, but like it would depend on which facet of just like global discussion. Economically, like I assume that after COVID-19, a lot of countries are going to be withdrawing from international trade with them. And I know that at the like pass between India and China, 20 Indian soldiers were killed, and this poses a threat to India from China, and slogans started like being stimulated like Indian Lives Matter and boycotting Chinese products. So
Right. Yeah. That's like I mean that very well may happen. So you're saying that the risk China poses economically is limited as a result of the coronavirus?
yes,
is that kind of the position you're making?
Because I believe a lot of countries may be focusing towards regionalization, especially with the U.S. having its USMCA agreement with Mexico and Canada. That might gain some more power in the future.
Yep, that's pretty reasonable. All right, so let's move beyond the U.S. and talk about like some different potential hotspots. So Saudi Arabia and Iran. This is like an extemp question that's asked all the time. Is there a risk of war? So anyone who thinks that the answer is yes, chime in and give me the case. And don't be afraid, because If you try, you'll get good feedback. All right, I'm just going to keep waiting because this is a very important issue, Saudi Arabia and Iran.
I would say that there is not a risk of war between Saudi Arabia and Iran because while the magnitude would be high, considering that until the vaccine comes out, warfare would mean canceling social distancing and increased spread of coronavirus. The probability of war is very low because both countries likely acknowledge that and would likely at least wait a certain amount of time until like they have regrown economically, until they're cushioned for a war.
I disagree though, because like the proxy war in Yemen is finally coming to a head with like the serious impact considering the effect it's had on Yemen. And I think I think the coronavirus could be like the breaking point for an all-out war instead of the proxy war.
Supposedly, though, you could almost see reflections of the former situation between the U.S. and USSR in that if Saudi Arabia and Iran were to be engaged in an actual conflict, the potential for mutually assured destruction is quite high because they also both have strong international alliances and a variety of proxy war-related locations throughout the region, as both of them are hegemons.
Yeah, that is really, really solid analysis. So what we call that is Brink Analysis. It's like at the point where this is true, or insofar as this is true, this must also be true, if that makes sense to you guys. And that's really what you want to be doing when you're assessing risk, is Brink Analysis. Insofar as this. It's like a proof almost. But let's think about this more concretely in terms of the three things that might make action, i.e. war making, happen between these two countries. So you mentioned capacities and mutually assured destruction. Saudi Arabia and Iran both have like substantial military capacities and backings from international powers. So the capabilities are there, yes. Opportunity. Someone was chiming in and mentioning that coronavirus might provide an opportunity for a conflict, right? That provides the excuse, the justification. That's like the Franz Ferdinand getting shot by the Black Hand, opportunity moment, the spark, right? The trigger for conflict. What are some other things that could potentially be triggers? Or elaborate on how coronavirus could be. But yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say Soleimani dying could have been a trigger back then.
Right. So it ended up not being, which indicates to us that the threshold for a trigger for war between these two countries is super high, insofar as assassinating a top military leader in Iran was not sufficient to be an impetus for war. So that's important information because it tells us that the threshold would need to be perhaps even higher than that. Anything else that could be provide an opportunity to declare war for either side?
If more missiles came from the Houthis in Yemen and attacked Saudi Arabia, that could be a trigger. But because Saudi Arabia didn't go to war in the past, it's pretty unlikely that's going to be a trigger in the future.
Yep, I think you're probably right. That is maybe the most likely. It's like Houthi missile hits a major Saudi Arabian city, that would probably provide grounds for war insofar as they're able to link that to Iran. But yeah, you're right. There have been these missile strikes. None of them have hit like a major populated area, but there have not really been repercussions so far. And Iran continues to deny that it's working with the Houthis, so that would also likely be a good counter argument against that. But yeah, there's a whole bunch, right? And it could be the U.S. or Russia or something on either side, or something to do with any of the geopolitical things going on in that super, super complex region of the world. All right, but now let's talk about motivation. So just let's start on the Saudi Arabia side. What might provide Saudi Arabia a motivation to go to war with Iran?
Becomes like the hegemon for the Middle East.
Yeah, but let's think about that more concretely, right? What do they want to achieve? But what would they achieve by going to war with Iran? You know, hegemony is a nice word to throw around, but like, you know, even if they conquered all of Iran, they would be nowhere near the US, Russia, China, most of the European countries. So why is Middle Eastern hegemony valuable? What are some things materially or practically that Saudi Arabia could be incentivized to go to war with Iran?
They'd gain access to like all of the other countries' oil reserves, like assuming they were able to become the #1 power, and they would also be able to get any other resources that were like part of economies.
Yep, resources. That's pretty good. So oftentimes resources provide a motivation for war. What else provides a motivation for war other than resources? Think back throughout history. Why do wars start? Why do people start wars?
Border conflicts.
Yeah. So I mean that's sort of nested under the question of resources, right? But it could be sparked by some kind of skirmish at the border. There's a contestation about territory. You want something in their territory. Typically that's a question of resources, but it could be more of an ideological thing too, an identity-based thing, right? We see this happening in Israel where certain parcels of land are considered holy and are connected to, you know, faiths that are literally thousands of years old. So really, yeah, that's a good one because it kind of talks about the two big ones that are causing conflict. It's like number one, resources, and number two, identity. So it's like resource politics and identity politics. And what is the big identity dynamic happening between Saudi Arabia and Iran?
So religion.
Yep. What about the religion? The comparative religions.
Versus Shia thing.
Yep, you got it. So Sunni versus Shia. Saudi Arabia is Sunni, Iran is Shia. This is like the major division point in Islam. Both of those countries kind of represent the head honcho for each of those sides of it. So perhaps the motivation could be ideological, identity-based, and even broader ideologically, it's who they're allied with internationally. So the motivation could be through pressure from the United States v. Russia, insofar as there's kind of a proxy conflict going on right now between us and Russia vis-a-vis these countries. So that's pretty good. But now what are some reasons why that motivation might not exist on the identity side? So perhaps the commonalities provided by Islam are greater than the differences that exist between the two groups. And the fact that Mecca, like the holiest city in Islam, exists in Saudi Arabia might actually be a deterrent against Iran. Okay, so these are all some reasons why, you know, Saudi Arabia might have an incentive to go to war against Iran. How about Iran? Why might Iran's regime go to war against Saudi Arabia?
Well, you were just talking about like Mecca is located inside Saudi Arabia, so maybe like in an act of dominance over like all of like the Islamic holy sites, they'd like try to claim Mecca.
Yeah, so you know, maybe maybe they want to take over that specific city, and that would give them some kind of ideological victory. But you know, practically, it's like a lot of the Saudi Arabian U.S. coalition, also used to be the Kurds as well, is getting in the way of Iran's dream of the so-called Shiite Crescent. If you guys have heard of this, it's a uninterrupted landmass going from Iran to Lebanon, through Syria, through Iraq, that Iran wants control over. It kind of looks like a crescent moon on a map. And Saudi Arabia gets in the way of that. So that might be grounds for war. That's a resources, territory type of argument. All right, so I think, yeah, we've kind of unpacked that pretty sufficiently. And we got about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to open it up to Q&A. It doesn't even have to be about foreign policy. Any questions you may have about anything related to Extemp. But yeah, the big takeaways I'd say from today are risk equals magnitude times probability. Probability equals opportunity plus capability plus motivation. And, nested within motivation are territorial or identity/ideological incentives. So really those, I think, are the big things that you want to do when you're understanding how conflicts might happen. And all of these terms and understandings are really useful in speeches and to articulate to judges. I use the risk equation a whole bunch in my Extemp career and would often organize my speeches along the lines of opportunity, capacity, and motivation. But yeah, Q&A. Anyone who's got any questions about anything, really?
How would you go about dealing with the foreign policy of two countries that you don't know the relationship of? Like, for example, if you have to deal with the foreign policy of like Tunisia and Ethiopia.
Yeah, so I guess like the first piece of advice I would say is don't draw that question. Go with one of the other two. Even if even if it's foreign policy round and there's maybe like 6 countries that are being asked about in your 3 questions, even if you know about one, you should probably go with that one over the one that you know about neither. But you also aren't really it's really not the end of the world, because you can make a lot of inferences about foreign policy between 2 nations. Tunisia and Ethiopia is an odd one because they aren't really, they're not exactly neighbors. I don't know if that you're saying that based off of something that's happening in the news that I'm not aware of, but I don't really know that there is a big foreign policy thing going there, but that isn't to say that people wouldn't ask about it in Extemp. So if you had that, what I would do is use some kind of resource like the CIA World Fact Book or something that can give you hard data about these countries to make inferences, right? So let's say that it says that this would be really simple, but Ethiopia has a shortage of grain, but the CIA World Fact Book is telling you that Tunisia's second biggest output is grain. Well, then that can be a point in your speech that maybe this is an opportunity for trade between the 2 countries that could be mutually beneficial, and Ethiopia could provide something to Tunisia in return that Tunisia is lacking. So, you can figure these things out just based on data points. You can also look in your database and be like, what have Tunisia and Ethiopia been in the news for recently? So Ethiopia is having this big kind of dispute with Egypt. Well, maybe this point can be about how Tunisia could in some way assist in that dispute because it's on good terms with Egypt. Historically, they both went through the Arab Spring together, underwent certain democratic reforms, and their leaders are on good terms. So maybe Tunisia could be a third-party broker that could help oversee the conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt, something like that. So basically, it's using the information that you have, the limited information that you have, to extrapolate into arguments, if that makes sense. So, think about it like a chessboard, and it's Tunisia and Ethiopia are 2 pieces on the chessboard. It's based on other limited information that I have, how can I move these pieces around? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I heard for foreign policy questions, the type of substructure is actor, impact. How would that play out in a speech?
So here's what I'd say. The substructure stuff is really, I think, should not be emphasized in the way that it is. I really would not be formatting your speeches into any kind of concrete substructure. I know this sounds kind of blasphemous, but obviously you want to have a substructure, you want nuance, but you don't want to be designing your speeches out to be actor, impact, because A, that doesn't sound super authentic, and B, oftentimes that's not the best way to describe something, right? So it's first I talk about Tunisia, then I talk about Ethiopia, then I talk about the impact. Maybe it's actually valuable to first talk about a dynamic between Ethiopia and Tunisia, to second, talk about a historical precedent that explains that dynamic further, and then third, explain why that, answers the question specifically, right? So rather than trying to stick to some kind of dogmatic substructure, like take a deep breath, take a step back and think about how can I explain this argument? So like, let's say you make the argument about Tunisia serving as a power broker between Ethiopia and Egypt. So I'm like, how would I organize this speech? I would probably be like, number one, Ethiopia and Egypt are having some problems right now. Number two, luckily, Tunisia is on really good terms with Egypt. Number three, Tunisia could be a third-party broker between these two countries, right? Like that's a logical, straightforward narrative that I'm telling about how, foreign policy between these two countries could operate. So really, you want to be telling a straightforward story rather than trying to shoehorn into, an outline for when you should be talking about which actors, etc. But sorry, that was more of just answering what your thing was. What was your exact question?
Oh, thanks. That answered it pretty well.
Okay, great.
Yo, Tanner, could you go over, like, for some people who might not know a lot about foreign policy, like some important glossary terms like soft power, hard power, some basic like theory in general, based on what you were saying last week about American hegemony and stuff like that in the present and future?
Yeah, that's a really good idea for sure. So, basically, there's this big dichotomy between hard power and soft power. Hard power is just like military strength, and then soft power is sort of like a novel concept in the past, few decades. This Harvard professor, Joseph Nye, coins the term. He writes this book that's something along the lines of called Soft Power, the Means to Success in World Politics. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. And his thesis is like, in the modern era of mutually assured destruction and unquestionable U.S. hegemony, the way to achieve strength in the world is through soft power. So like a good example of this is France hosting the Paris Accords and France just having like clout in general. Like there's really no reason for France to have clout in the world right now. Like that makes no sense. They don't have like a sizable population. Their economy is pretty messed up. They don't have a strong military, but their culture is super present and they have a long historical cultural influence on a bunch of their former colonies across the globe. And also they're producing a lot of cultural stuff. So that's all like soft power, right? So everything that's not straight up military strength is soft power. And within that, the two big categories are economic strength and like cultural hegemony, right? So the reason why I think that the US is unquestionably the hegemon, and I think, most experts would be on the same page about that. Not all of them though, certainly. Is because the US really dominates all three of those things. So the hard power side for sure. And then within the soft power, cultural and economic strength, the locus of the globe at that is on the US. And then in terms of other sort of foreign policy concepts and stuff, there's a million, and like there's a whole bunch of really good books on this sort of thing. But really what you want to be doing in your speeches as much as possible is using these terms. And then, so the way I do it is like hard power or a nation's military strength, blah, 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 blah. So it's kind of like term and then a comma, a clause, another comma, and then back to your point. And that's kind of how you want to be talking about these terms really, intelligently and succinctly as well, because Extemp is all about word economy. Yeah, if there's any other like specific questions people have about different foreign policy terms that they might not know what they mean, feel free to ask away. I might not know the answer either, but I guess we'll find out. Or any other questions?
Are there any like books you like about foreign policy that you would recommend?
Great question. So that Joseph Nye one is really good. It's called Soft Power. The Clash of Civilizations is really, really good too. That book is by Samuel Huntington. And basically the thesis of that book is that people's cultural allegiances their cultural identities, often intermingled with religion, will be the determinations for how nations orient themselves with other nations, and also are what will define conflict. So he writes this book in, I'm pretty sure, the mid-90s, and predicts a few things that ended up happening. He predicted that Russia would absorb part of Ukraine because they're so culturally similar, and that the biggest threat to the West in the early 21st century would be Islamic extremism, which is pretty accurate as well. So this is kind of a rebuttal against the realist idea that hegemony competitions are what define world conflict and world affairs. His argument is actually, no, it's identity and cultural competitions and clashes that define it. So, I mean, if you started with those two books, you'd be in a pretty good shape. John Mearsheimer is just an all-time classic. He's the OG realist guy. He writes this book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, which is really, really good. There's Guns, Germs, and Steel is a super easy read and is a really fantastic book. It's by this guy named Jared Diamond. And basically, he's talking about the history of, civilization and why did Europe develop technologically so much faster than the rest of the world and all this other stuff. And he brings it down to these three principles: guns, germs, and steel. And it's a very useful book. I cited it all the time. I think those would be a pretty good starting point for anyone who is interested in reading about foreign policy. Anyone else? We got 2 minutes left, so. Another guy's Richard Haass, who's the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. He just wrote a book that I have yet to read, but has really good reviews. It's called The World, A Brief Introduction. It came out this year. And basically, it's just, from what I understand, an explanation of global affairs today. And then he has this 2017 book that's really good called A World in Disarray. And it's specifically focused on American foreign policy, but it's, kind of written from the perspective of what could somebody conceivably do as president to make the world more stable. All right, there's probably time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anything related or not related to Extemp, I guess. Really, any questions that you might have? All right, well, thank you guys all for your time today, and I hope you learned something. If you've got any follow-up questions or concerns, do not hesitate to reach out to me. My phone number is 952-380-7066. And I wish you all good luck on your season next year.
Yep, cool. Everyone give a little Zoom clap, unless someone has a question. Shibam.
Clapping.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, as far as it goes now, Tanner, you're chilling. You can just dip whenever. And then the rest of you, we're going to be doing a practice speech with Cossack's pretty soon. So you guys can go back to the main room and just wait for Anant and Steve to get back as well.